Genevieve Sterling thought she had won. She believed that inviting her son's heartbroken ex-girlfriend to his wedding was the ultimate power move, the final nail in the coffin of a romance she had spent 5 years trying to bury. She wanted Kaylin to watch. She wanted her to suffer. But when the heavy oak doors of the cathedral swung open, Kaylin didn't walk in crying. She didn't walk in alone. She walked in holding the hands of 2 toddlers, twins who had the groom's eyes, the groom's chin, and the groom's heir-apparent smile. In a single heartbeat, the wedding of the decade turned into a battlefield. This is the story of how a cruel mother played with fire, and how 2 secrets she tried to kill came back to burn her legacy to the ground. The invitation was heavy, printed on cream cardstock so thick it felt like a weapon in the hand. It was embossed with gold leaf, smelling faintly of lavender and old money. To the average person, it was just a piece of paper inviting them to the union of Harrison Sterling and Annabelle Prescott at the St. Jude Cathedral in Boston. But to Genevieve Sterling, Harrison's mother, it was a declaration of war. Genevieve sat in her study, a room clad in dark mahogany and velvet, overlooking the manicured gardens of her estate in Beacon Hill. She held one specific envelope in her hand. The calligraphy on the front was sharp and aggressive. Ms. Kaylin Rossi. Genevieve smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were like glacial ice, beautiful, blue, and utterly void of warmth. She took a sip of her Pinot Grigio, savoring the bitterness. "You're actually sending it." The voice came from the doorway. It was Harrison. At 28, Harrison Sterling was the picture of American royalty, tall, broad-shouldered, with sandy blonde hair and a jawline that could cut glass. He looked like a Kennedy, but he carried himself like a prisoner. He was leaning against the doorframe, his posture slumped, looking at the stack of envelopes on his mother's desk with a mixture of dread and nausea. "Of course I am, darling," Genevieve said, her voice smooth as silk. She licked the seal of the envelope with a slow, deliberate motion. "It's only polite. Kaylin was a significant part of your adolescence. It would be rude to exclude her just because things didn't work out." "She hates us, Mother," Harrison said, his voice cracking slightly. "After what you did. After how we left it. She moved to Chicago. She fell off the map. Why would you want her there? It's sadistic." Genevieve stood up, smoothing the skirt of her Chanel suit. She walked over to her son, reaching up to adjust his collar. Her touch was possessive, not affectionate. "Sadistic? No, Harrison. It's closure. I want her to see you happy. I want her to see that you have moved on to a woman of your own station. Annabelle is a Prescott. She brings oil money and senators to this table. Kaylin was a barista with an art degree. She needs to see this wedding to understand her place in the world. It's a lesson." Harrison pulled away from her touch, walking toward the window. "I haven't spoken to her in 3 years. Not since the day you told her I was cheating on her." "Because it was necessary," Genevieve snapped, her facade cracking for a microsecond. "You were going to throw away your inheritance for her. I saved you, Harrison. I saved this family. And now you are going to marry Annabelle, merge our assets, and secure the Sterling legacy. Kaylin Rossi is a ghost. Let the ghost come and see that the living have moved on." Harrison didn't fight back. He never did. He had learned from a young age that fighting Genevieve Sterling was like fighting a riptide. The more you struggled, the faster you drowned. He just stared out the window at the grey Boston sky. He missed Kaylin every single day. He missed her laugh, the smell of her vanilla shampoo, the way she used to look at him like he was just Harrison, not Harrison Sterling. but he was a coward. He knew it. His mother held the purse strings to the trust fund that supported his lifestyle, his venture capital firm, and the very roof over his head. "Send it," Harrison whispered, defeated. "She won't come anyway." Genevieve dropped the envelope into the outgoing mail tray with a satisfying thud. "Oh, she'll come," Genevieve murmured to herself as Harrison left the room. "Curiosity always kills the cat. And I want to be there to watch the light go out of her eyes one last time." 3 weeks later, in a cramped, sun-drenched apartment in Chicago, the envelope arrived. Kaylin Rossi was on her knees, scrubbing grape juice out of a beige rug. Her hair was thrown up in a messy bun, strands escaping to stick to her sweaty forehead. The apartment was chaotic. Toys scattered everywhere, the television blaring a cartoon about singing vegetables. "Leo, Mia, careful with the juice," she called out, though her voice lacked real anger. 2 toddlers, a boy and a girl, came tumbling into the room, giggling. They were 3 years old, a whirlwind of energy. Leo had messy, sandy blonde hair and a stubborn chin. Mia had piercing blue eyes that looked startlingly intelligent for a toddler. The mail slot clattered. Kaylin sighed, wiped her hands on her jeans, and walked to the door. She picked up the stack of bills and flyers, sifting through them until she froze. The heavy cream envelope, the gold leaf, the sterling crest. Her breath hitched in her throat. She felt the blood drain from her face. It had been 3 years. 3 years of silence. 3 years of rebuilding her life from the ashes Genevieve Sterling had left behind. She opened it with shaking fingers. "The pleasure of your company is requested at the marriage of Harrison James Sterling and Annabelle Marie Prescott." Kaylin laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "She invited me," she whispered to the empty hallway. "The witch actually invited me." She knew exactly why. Kaylin wasn't stupid. She knew Genevieve. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a victory lap. Genevieve wanted to rub Kaylin's nose in the fact that Harrison was marrying the right kind of girl. Kaylin walked back into the living room, sinking onto the sofa. She looked at the twins. Leo was trying to build a tower out of blocks, his brow furrowed in concentration, an expression she had seen on Harrison's face 1,000 times. Mia was reading a picture book, turning the pages with delicate precision. They didn't know their father. They only knew him as the man in the picture Kaylin kept in her jewelry box. When Kaylin had left Boston, she was pregnant. She had gone to Harrison's apartment to tell him, to fight for him one last time, despite his mother's interference. But Genevieve had intercepted her at the gate. Genevieve had told her that Harrison had moved on, that he was disgusted by Kaylin's clinginess, and had offered her a check for $50,000 to disappear. Kaylin had torn up the check and thrown it in Genevieve's face. But she had left. She was proud and she was heartbroken. She moved to Chicago, changed her number, and raised the twins on her own, working 2 jobs, refusing to take a dime from the Sterling family. But now, this invitation, it felt like a challenge. "Mama?" Mia asked, waddling over and patting Kaylin's knee. "You sad?" Kaylin looked down at her daughter. Those blue eyes, the sterling blue. A fire ignited in Kaylin's chest. It wasn't the fire of a heartbroken girl anymore. It was the inferno of a mother who had been wronged. Genevieve thought Kaylin was still the weak, poor art student she could bully. Genevieve didn't know about Leo and Mia. If Genevieve wanted a show, Kaylin decided, she would give her a show. She picked up her phone and dialed her best friend, Samantha, who was a high-powered divorce attorney in New York. "Sam?" Kaylin said, her voice steady and cold. "Kaylin, everything okay?" "I need a dress," Kaylin said. "A really expensive dress, and I need to borrow some money for plane tickets to Boston. First class. What's going on? Kaelin looked at the invitation again, her eyes narrowing. I've been invited to a wedding, and I think it's time Harrison met his children. The day of the wedding was crisp and cold, a perfect New England autumn day. The St. Jude Cathedral was packed to the rafters with the elite of Boston society. Senators, CEOs, socialites, and old money dynasties filled the pews, a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns. The air smelled of expensive lilies and hypocrisy. At the front of the altar, Harrison stood waiting. He looked pale. His best man, a college friend named Bryce, leaned in. You look like you're going to the gallows, man. Breathe. I can't breathe, Harrison muttered. He scanned the crowd, his eyes darting nervously. He didn't know why he was looking. She wouldn't be here. She couldn't be. In the front row, Genevieve sat like a queen on her throne. She wore a silver gown that cost more than most people's cars. She looked triumphant. She had scanned the guest list as people arrived. No sign of Kaelin. Good, Genevieve thought. A little disappointed, but mostly satisfied. She knew her place. She was too ashamed to show her face. The organ music swelled. The heavy doors at the back of the church opened. The crowd turned, expecting to see Annabelle Prescott in her Vera Wang gown. But it wasn't Annabelle. The guests gasped. A murmur rippled through the church, starting as a low buzz and rising to a shocked clamor. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon light, was a woman in a dress of deep, blood-red silk. It was tasteful, elegant, but completely inappropriate for a wedding. It was a power color. The woman was stunning, her dark hair cascading in waves, her head held high. It was Kaelin. But the red dress wasn't what caused the gasp. Holding her left hand was a little boy in a miniature tuxedo. Holding her right hand was a little girl in a matching red velvet dress. Kaelin didn't stop. She began to walk down the aisle. The organist, confused, faltered and stopped playing. The silence that descended on the cathedral was deafening. The only sound was the clicking of Kaelin's heels on the marble floor and the soft patter of the children's feet. Genevieve froze. Her champagne flute remained halfway to her mouth in her mind, though her hands were empty and gripping the pew in reality. She squinted. Who are those children? As Kaelin got closer, the answer became undeniable. The boy, Leo, looked around the cathedral with wide eyes, and as he turned his head, the light hit his profile. It was Harrison. It was Harrison at 3 years old. The resemblance was not just a similarity, it was a photocopy. Harrison, standing at the altar, felt his knees buckle. He grabbed the altar rail to keep from falling. He stared at the woman he had never stopped loving, and then at the 2 children she was leading toward him. "Oh my God," Bryce whispered next to him. "Harrison, are those—" Kaelin stopped 5 rows back from the front, right in the center of the aisle. She didn't look at the guests. She looked straight at Genevieve. Genevieve stood up, her face twisting into a mask of fury. She stepped out of the pew, blocking the aisle. "What is the meaning of this?" Genevieve hissed, her voice low but carrying in the acoustic silence of the church. "How dare you show up here, and with hired props?" Kaelin smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Hello, Genevieve. Thank you for the invitation. You wanted me to see Harrison's future, didn't you? I thought it was only fair that he sees his past." She looked up at Harrison. Their eyes locked. "Harrison," Kaelin said, her voice clear and steady. "Meet Leo and Mia, your son and daughter." The silence shattered. "Liar!" Genevieve screamed, losing her composure entirely. "Get her out of here. Security." "They aren't props, Genevieve," Kaelin said, her voice rising over the older woman's screeching. "And I have the DNA tests in my purse to prove it. You told me 3 years ago that the Sterlings don't leave loose ends. Well, these are 2 very loose ends." Harrison vaulted over the altar rail. He didn't walk. He ran. He ignored his mother, ignored the gasps of the senators and the socialites. He ran down the aisle and stopped 3 feet from Kaelin and the twins. He dropped to his knees. He looked at Leo. Leo looked back, confused, and hid behind Kaelin's leg. "Hi," Harrison whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Hi there." "Who is that man?" Mia asked loudly, pointing a chubby finger at Harrison. "That's your daddy," Kaelin said softly, her eyes filling with tears she refused to shed. "The one I told you about." "Harrison!" Genevieve marched over, grabbing his shoulder. "Get up! This is a trick! She's a gold digger trying to ruin your wedding day. Annabelle is waiting in the vestibule." Harrison stood up slowly. The sadness in his eyes was gone, replaced by something Genevieve had never seen before. Pure, unadulterated rage. He shook his mother's hand off his shoulder. "Don't touch me." "Harrison," Genevieve warned, her voice dropping to a threatening octave. "Think about the trust. Think about the firm." "Did you know?" Harrison asked, his voice shaking. "Did you know she was pregnant when you sent her away?" Kaelin answered for her. "She knew, Harrison. I told her. I was standing at your gate, begging to see you. She told me you didn't want a bastard child complicating your merger with the Prescott family. She offered me $50,000 to get an abortion." A collective gasp went through the church. Even the priest looked horrified. Harrison turned to his mother. He looked like a stranger. "You tried to buy my children?" "I tried to protect you," Genevieve shrieked, realizing she was losing the crowd. "She is trash, Harrison. She would have dragged you down to mediocrity. Look at this stunt. Who brings bastards to a wedding?" "Don't call them that," Harrison roared. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling, making the stained glass vibrate. At that moment, the doors at the back of the church opened again. Annabelle Prescott, the bride, stood there. She had heard the shouting. She saw the twins. She saw the groom standing with his ex. Annabelle, to her credit, was a smart woman. She took one look at the undeniable resemblance between the groom and the toddler boy, looked at the fury on Harrison's face, and simply turned around. "I'm out," Annabelle said loud enough for the back rows to hear. She gathered her massive train and walked out of the church into the waiting limo. The wedding was effectively over. But the war had just begun. The heavy oak doors of St. Jude Cathedral slammed shut behind them, muffling the chaotic roar of the wedding guests. Outside, the Boston air was biting, the wind whipping Kaelin's red dress around her legs like a flag of rebellion. Harrison stood on the sidewalk, shivering in his tuxedo. He looked like a man who had just survived a plane crash, dazed, shaking, and stripped of everything he understood about his reality. Kaelin didn't look at him. She was kneeling on the concrete, buttoning Leo's coat. "You did good, baby. You were so brave." "I want juice," Leo grumbled, tugging at his bow tie. "We'll get juice," Kaelin promised. She stood up, hoisting Mia onto her hip. She turned to leave, walking toward a battered rental sedan parked illegally in a loading zone. "Kaelin." Harrison's voice was a croak. He stepped forward. "Wait." She stopped but didn't turn around. "I didn't come here to save you, Harrison. I came to burn her down. Mission accomplished. Go back to your mother. I'm sure she has a damage control team waiting." "I'm not going back," Harrison said. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He looked back at the church. He could hear the faint sound of shouting from inside. If he went back in there, he was a dead man walking, a puppet forever. "I can't go back." Kaelin turned then. Her eyes were hard, assessing him. "Then where are you going? You have no coat, no car keys. I saw you leave them on the altar. And I'm betting Genevieve has already frozen your cards." Harrison patted his pockets. Empty. He felt a surge of panic, the unique panic of a man who has never had to worry about money, suddenly realizing he has none. I don't know, he admitted. Mia, resting on Kaylin's hip, pointed a small finger at Harrison. He looks sad, Mama. Kaylin's face softened, just a fraction. She sighed, a sound of deep exhaustion. Get in the car, Harrison, before the paparazzi show up. The drive to the budget motel near the airport was silent. Harrison sat in the passenger seat, his knees pressed against the dashboard of the compact car. In the rearview mirror, he saw his own eyes staring back at him from Leo's face. The boy was playing with a plastic dinosaur, completely unaware that he was the heir to a billion-dollar empire. When they got to the motel room, a stark contrast to the 5-star honeymoon suite Harrison was supposed to be in tonight, Kaylin let the kids loose on the bed with a tablet. She turned to Harrison, crossing her arms. Talk. You have 5 minutes before I kick you out. Harrison sat on the edge of the wobbly desk chair. I didn't know, he said, his voice breaking. You have to believe me. If I had known... God, Kaylin, I would have burned the city down to get to you. You didn't fight for me then, Kaylin said, her voice devoid of pity. You let her tell you I was a cheater. You believed her over me. That's what hurts, Harrison. You didn't trust me. I was 25 and weak, Harrison said, putting his head in his hands. She produced photos. Doctored photos, obviously. She had bank statements showing payoffs from a rival firm. She constructed a reality where you were a corporate spy. It sounds insane now, but back then, she was my mother. I didn't think she was capable of that level of evil. She offered me 50 grand to kill them, Kaylin said, gesturing to the twins. Harrison flinched. I will kill her, he whispered. I swear to God. Save the macho act, Kaylin snapped. You're cut off, Harrison. I know how Genevieve works. Look at your phone. Harrison pulled his smartphone from his pocket. No service. She cut the plan, Kaylin said dryly. Try your banking app. He connected to the motel Wi-Fi. Access denied. Account frozen due to suspicious activity. 0, Harrison said, staring at the screen. She's locked me out. Welcome to the real world, Kaylin said. She walked over to her purse and pulled out a $20 bill. She tossed it at him. That's for dinner. There's a burger place across the street. I'm not feeding you. I barely have enough for the flights back to Chicago tomorrow. Harrison looked at the bill. It was the most humiliating moment of his life. And yet, looking at Leo and Mia jumping on the bed, he felt a strange, terrifying sense of liberation. I'm coming with you, Harrison said. Kaylin laughed. To Chicago? To live in a 2-bedroom walk-up? You're Harrison Sterling. You need 400 thread count sheets and a personal chef. You won't last a day. Watch me, Harrison said. He stood up, taking off his tuxedo jacket and rolling up his sleeves. He looked at Leo. Hey, buddy, can I see that dinosaur? Leo hesitated, looking at his mom for approval. Kaylin paused, her heart warring with her head. Finally, she gave a curt nod. Leo handed the dinosaur to Harrison. It's a T-Rex. He eats people. Does he? Harrison smiled, a genuine sad smile. I know some people like that. For the first time in 3 years, Harrison Sterling fell asleep, not in a silk bed, but on a lumpy motel floor with a towel for a pillow, listening to the breathing of the children he should have raised. He had nothing, and he had everything. But the silence of the night was deceptive. Genevieve Sterling was not sleeping. She was in her study, surrounded by a team of lawyers who billed more per hour than Kaylin made in a month. I want them, Genevieve said, swirling her scotch. The boy, "The girl. They are Sterling's. They belong to the estate." "And the father?" the lawyer asked. "Harrison chose his side," Genevieve said, her eyes cold as diamonds. "Destroy him. But get me those children. I don't care what it costs." The war didn't start with a shout. It started with a subpoena. It had been 2 weeks since the wedding. Harrison was living on Kaylin's sofa in Chicago. He had sold his Rolex pawn shop style to pay for his share of the groceries and a cheap prepaid phone. He had found a job, not in venture capital, but waiting tables at an upscale steakhouse where the manager recognized his last name and hired him as a novelty. Harrison didn't care. He was learning to change diapers. He was learning that Mia hated peas and Leo was afraid of the dark. He was falling in love with his family, and he was slowly, painfully earning back Kaylin's trust. They weren't back together. She made him sleep on the couch, but the ice was thawing. Then came the knock on the door. It was a Saturday morning. Pancakes were on the griddle. Harrison opened the door, expecting the mailman. Instead, he found a process server. A large man with a stone face. "Kaylin Rossi?" the man asked, looking past Harrison. "I'm here," Kaylin said, wiping flour from her hands, stepping up behind Harrison. "You've been served," the man said, shoving a thick packet of documents into a chest. He turned to Harrison and handed him a separate, thinner envelope. "And you, Mr. Sterling. Court date is Monday, 9:00 a.m. Cook County Family Court. Emergency hearing." Kaylin tore open the envelope. Her hands started to shake. "Emergency hearing? For what?" She scanned the legal jargon. Her face went pale. "She's filing for full custody," Kaylin whispered, "on the grounds of child endangerment." "What?" Harrison grabbed the papers. Genevieve's lawyers were creative. The affidavit claimed that Kaylin Rossi had kidnapped the Sterling heirs, hiding them in squalor in Chicago. It claimed she was mentally unstable, citing a brief stint Kaylin had in therapy after the breakup, which Genevieve had clearly dug up. But the worst part was the claim against Harrison. Harrison James Sterling is currently mentally unfit, having suffered a psychotic break at his own wedding, and is currently unemployed, homeless, and under the influence of a manipulative party. "She's saying I'm crazy," Harrison said, his voice rising. "She's saying I'm homeless." "Technically you are," Kaylin said, panic rising in her voice. "Harrison, look at the bottom. She's petitioning for grandparents' rights and temporary emergency guardianship. She wants to take them to Boston. If she gets them across state lines, we'll never see them again." "She can't do that," Harrison said. "We are their parents." "She's Genevieve Sterling," Kaylin screamed, throwing the papers on the floor. "She owns judges. She owns senators. I have $300 in my savings account, Harrison. How do we fight this?" The twins started crying at the noise. Kaylin collapsed onto the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. Harrison looked at the papers, then at the crying children, then at Kaylin. The fear in the room was palpable. Genevieve didn't need to be right. She just needed to be richer. She would bury them in motions and hearings until they went bankrupt or gave up. "We need a lawyer," Harrison said steadily. "A shark." "I can't afford a shark," Kaylin sobbed. "My friend Sam is a divorce lawyer, but she's in New York. She doesn't know Illinois family law." "I know someone," Harrison said. A dark look crossed his face. "There was a man my father used to use, a man Genevieve fired because he knew too much. He hates her almost as much as we do." "Does he work for free?" Kaylin asked bitterly. "No," Harrison said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He had saved it from the pawn shop. Inside was a pair of cufflinks, sapphire and diamond, vintage Cartier. They were the only thing his father had left him personally, hidden away from the trust. "These are worth $50,000, Harrison said. "It's a retainer." The courtroom on Monday smelled of floor wax and desperation. Genevieve was there, of course. She sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 3 lawyers in grey suits who looked like sharks in human skin. She wore a modest navy suit, a pearl necklace, and an expression of deep, pained concern. She looked like the grieving grandmother trying to save her grandkids from a crack house. Harrison and Cailin sat at the defense table. Their lawyer was Arthur Penhaligon. He was 70 years old, dishevelled, with a mustard stain on his tie and a cough that sounded like a rattling chain. But when he looked at Genevieve, his eyes gleamed with malice. "All rise," the bailiff droned. Judge Halloway entered. He was a stern man with a reputation for being tough on deadbeat dads. Genevieve's team had likely selected this venue carefully. The lead lawyer for Genevieve, a slick man named Vance, who Harrison remembered firing from a party once for being too drunk, stood up. "Your Honor," Vance began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "This is a tragic case. My client, Mrs. Sterling, simply wishes to provide a stable home for her grandchildren. The mother, Ms. Rossi, has hidden these children for 3 years, denying them their heritage, their medical history, and financial security. The father, Mr. Sterling, is currently undergoing a severe mental health crisis, having abandoned his fiancée at the altar to live in, well, let's call it substandard housing." He presented photos of Cailin's apartment building. It looked gritty in the black and white printouts. He presented photos of Harrison waiting tables. "Is this the environment for the heirs to the Sterling fortune?" Vance asked. "We are asking for immediate temporary custody to be granted to Mrs. Sterling until a full psychiatric evaluation can be done on the parents." The judge frowned, looking at Harrison. "Mr. Sterling, is it true you are currently unemployed in your field and living on a sofa?" Harrison stood up. Arthur put a hand on his arm to silence him, but Harrison shook it off. "It is true, Your Honor," Harrison said clearly, "because my mother stole everything else. But I am working, I am providing, and I am a father. A father who didn't know his children existed until 2 weeks ago," the judge noted coldly. "Because she," Harrison pointed at Genevieve, "lied to both of us." "Hearsay," Vance interrupted smoothly. "We have no proof of these allegations. However, we do have proof that Ms. Rossi has a history of financial instability." The tide was turning against them. Cailin was gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white. Genevieve looked serene. She checked her watch. She expected to be on a private jet with the twins by noon. Then Arthur Penhaligon stood up. He didn't smooth his tie. He didn't clear his throat. He just picked up a piece of paper. "Your Honor," Arthur rasped, "while Mr. Vance paints a lovely picture of a concerned grandmother, he neglected to mention the reason Mrs. Sterling is so desperate to acquire these children today. It isn't love. It isn't stability." "Objection," Vance said. "Relevance?" "Go on," the judge said, intrigued. Arthur walked toward the bench. "We have obtained medical records, specifically the medical records of the late Mr. Jonathan Sterling, Harrison's father." Genevieve's composure faltered. Her back stiffened. "Mr. Sterling died of a rare genetic blood disorder," Arthur continued. "Familial hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis. It is genetic, recessive. But here is the interesting part." Arthur turned to look at Genevieve. "Mrs. Sterling was diagnosed with early-stage leukemia 3 months ago. She needs a bone marrow transplant. Harrison was tested. He is not a match. She has no siblings." The courtroom went silent. "She doesn't want grandchildren, Your Honor," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a growl. "She wants harvestable donors. She needs a blood relative with the Sterling markers. She needs Leo or Mia to save her own life. The judge's eyes widened. He looked at Genevieve. Mrs. Sterling, is this true? Genevieve stood up, her face flushing red. This is a violation of my medical privacy. That man should be disbarred. It was submitted into evidence under the discovery of medical history, which you demanded for the children. Arthur smiled, showing yellow teeth. You opened the door, Genevieve. I just walked through it. Kaylin gasped, covering her mouth. She looked at Harrison. Harrison looked sick. You wanted to cut them open? Harrison shouted across the courtroom, his voice echoing. You wanted to take my children and put them under the knife to save yourself. I am the head of this family, Genevieve screamed, losing her concerned grandmother mask entirely. I am the Sterling legacy. Without me there is nothing. Those children owe me their lives. They are nothing but spare parts without the Sterling name. The silence that followed was absolute. The court reporter stopped typing. The judge looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Genevieve realized what she had said. She clamped her mouth shut, looking around the room. The mask had slipped, and underneath was a monster. Spare parts, the judge repeated slowly. He looked at the woman with utter disgust. Motion for temporary custody denied. The judge slammed his gavel down. Furthermore, I am issuing an immediate temporary restraining order. Mrs. Sterling, you are not to come within 500 feet of those children or their parents. If you attempt to contact them, I will have you thrown in jail for harassment. You can't do this, Genevieve shrieked. Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are, the judge said. Bailiff, clear the court. Harrison slumped into his chair, shaking. Kaylin grabbed his hand, squeezing it so hard it hurt. They had won, but the look in Genevieve's eyes as she was led out was not defeat. It was the cold, calculating look of a predator who had just been cornered. She wasn't done. She was dying, desperate, and humiliated, and that made her more dangerous than ever. As they walked out of the courthouse, Arthur lit a cigarette on the steps. She'll try something else, the old lawyer said, coughing smoke. She's dying. A dying beast strikes hardest. Watch your backs. Harrison put his arm around Kaylin. Let her try. But the twist wasn't over. As they drove back to the apartment, Kaylin's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It was a picture of Leo and Mia at their daycare, taken through the chain-link fence, taken today. The text read, Custody is a legal term. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Harrison slammed on the brakes. The daycare, he screamed. Genevieve had a plan B. If the courts wouldn't give her the donors, she would take them. The engine of the battered rental sedan whined in protest as Harrison floored the accelerator. The speedometer needle trembled past 80, a dangerous speed for the congested side streets of Chicago. Beside him, Kaylin was white-knuckled, gripping her phone with such force that her fingertips were turning blue. They're still on the line, Kaylin gasped, her voice shaking but deceptively controlled. Dispatch says a squad car is 4 minutes out. Harrison, 4 minutes is too long. We're almost there, Harrison gritted out. He didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on the road, scanning for gaps in the traffic. He ran a red light at the intersection of Darman and North, dodging a delivery truck by mere inches. The blast of the truck's horn faded behind them, swallowed by the roar of blood in his ears. He wasn't Harrison Sterling, the venture capitalist, anymore. He wasn't the man who worried about stock portfolios or public image. In that terrified, adrenaline-fueled moment, he was simply a father. A primal instinct had taken over, a dormant beast that Genevieve had tried to breed out of him with etiquette lessons and boarding schools. There, Kaylin screamed, pointing. They screeched around the final corner. The Little Acorns daycare was a colourful building, usually a place of laughter and finger-painting. Now it looked like a crime scene in progress. A sleek, obsidian-black SUV, the kind used by government officials or high-level targets, was idling aggressively on the curb. The chain-link gate to the playground had been forced open, the metal twisted. Harrison slammed the brakes. The car skidded across the gravel, coming to a halt just feet from the SUV's bumper. Inside the playground, chaos reigned. The daycare workers were screaming, huddled near the door. But near the swing set, two large men in dark suits were moving with military precision. They weren't common thugs. These were private contractors. Expensive muscle. One of them had Leo. The boy was tucked under the man's arm like a package, his small legs kicking uselessly against the man's ribcage. Leo's face was red, his mouth open in a silent scream of terror. The second man was reaching for Mia. The little girl was on the ground, clinging to the leg of a plastic slide, sobbing. "No!" The roar tore from Harrison's throat, raw and animalistic. He didn't wait to put the car in park. He threw the door open and sprinted. He vaulted over the low hood of the sedan, his dress shoes slipping on the asphalt. But he recovered instantly. The distance to the playground felt like miles, but he crossed it in seconds. The man holding Leo turned, hearing the commotion. He looked bored, professional. He raised a hand to stop Harrison. "Sir, stay back! We have a legal—" Harrison didn't stop. He lowered his shoulder and slammed into the guard with the force of a freight train. It wasn't a calculated fighting move. It was pure physics and desperation. The air left the guard's lungs in a violent whoosh. Both men went down hard into the wood chips. Harrison scrambled for purchase, his hands flying, punching blindly. He felt his fist connect with a jaw, then a cheekbone. "Let him go!" Harrison screamed, grabbing the man's collar. The guard, recovering from the surprise, shoved Harrison off with massive strength. Harrison flew backward, landing hard on his spine. The wind was knocked out of him, black spots dancing in his vision. "Harrison!" Kaylin's voice pierced the fog. She was running toward Mia, throwing herself over her daughter's body, just as the second guard reached for her. The guard hesitated, looking at the fierce woman snarling up at him like a wolf protecting her cub. Harrison scrambled to his feet. His lip was split, blood tasting of copper and salt filling his mouth. He stood between the guards and his family. He raised his fists. He had never been in a fistfight in his life, but he knew he would die on this playground before he let them pass. "You want them?" Harrison spat, blood dripping onto his white shirt. "You have to go through me, and I promise you, I will take your eyes out." The lead guard, the one holding Leo, hesitated. He set the boy down, though he kept a hand on Leo's shoulder. He looked at Harrison's face, the sheer, unhinged fury in his eyes. These men were paid to intimidate, not to kill billionaires in broad daylight. "Boss," the guard said, looking toward the black SUV. "This is getting messy." The back door of the SUV opened slowly. A cane emerged first, tipped with silver. Then a frail hand. Genevieve Sterling stepped out. The transformation was shocking. In the weeks since the wedding, the cancer had ravaged her. She was skeletal, her skin the color of parchment. She wore a heavy fur coat despite the mild weather, shivering as the wind hit her. But her eyes, those icy blue eyes, were untouched by the illness. They burned with a manic, feverish light. She hobbled onto the playground, ignoring the dirt on her expensive shoes. "Messy," Genevieve rasped, her voice thin but cutting. "Life is messy. Survival is messy. Put the boy in the car." "Mother," Harrison said. The word sounded like a curse. Genevieve looked at him. There was no love in her gaze, only a desperate, starving hunger. She looked past him to Leo. She didn't see a grandson. She saw a blood bag. She saw a donor match. She saw more time. "Harrison," she said, clutching her cane. "Don't be dramatic. The court was wrong. The judge is an idiot. They are sterlings. They belong to the estate. They belong to me." "They aren't things, Genevieve," Harrison shouted, stepping forward. "They are children, my children." "And you are my son," she shrieked, her composure cracking. "I gave you life. I built a world for you. And now, when I need a small sacrifice, a simple procedure, you deny me? You would let the matriarch of this family rot." "A procedure?" Kaelin yelled from the ground, clutching Mia and pulling Leo toward her. "You want a bone marrow transplant from a 3-year-old. You want to harvest them like crops. It is their duty," Genevieve screamed, spit flying from her mouth. She looked deranged. "I am the only thing holding this family together. Without me, you are nothing. You are a waiter, a nobody." She turned to the guards, her face twisting into a mask of command. "Take them. Now. I will pay you triple. 5 times the fee." The guards looked at each other. They looked at the dying woman, then at the furious father, and finally at the flashing lights reflecting off the daycare windows. The sirens were deafening now. 3 squad cars screeched into the lot, blocking the exit. "We're done," the lead guard said. He released Leo completely. "We didn't sign up for kidnapping charges, lady." "Cowards!" Genevieve hissed. "I will ruin you." The guards ignored her, putting their hands up as police officers swarmed the playground, guns drawn. "Police! Get on the ground!" Harrison didn't get on the ground. He watched as the officers moved past him toward his mother. Genevieve didn't run. She couldn't. She stood alone in the center of the wood chips, the wind whipping her coat around her frail frame. As the officers grabbed her arms, forcing them behind her back, she didn't fight. She just stared at Harrison. Her eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying mixture of rage and fear, the fear of death, the fear of oblivion. "Harrison," she whispered, her voice carrying over the commotion. "Please, I don't want to die." For a moment, the world stopped. Harrison looked at the woman who had controlled his every breath for 28 years. He saw the monster who had lied, manipulated, and tried to steal his children. But he also saw a terrified, sick old woman facing the end of her life alone. He felt a pang of pity. Not love, just pity. He walked closer, stopping just out of her reach. "You chose this," Harrison said softly. "You chose the money. You chose the pride. You chose the lie. You spent your whole life building a fortress to keep people out. And now, you're going to die inside it." "I did it for you," she wept, the tears finally falling. "I did it for the legacy." "The legacy is dead," Harrison said, his voice steady. He turned his back on her. He walked toward Kaelin and the twins. "And I'm finally free." As they handcuffed Genevieve Sterling and led her toward the squad car, she began to scream. It wasn't a scream of anger anymore. It was the wail of a child in the dark. Harrison didn't look back. He dropped to his knees in the dirt and pulled his family into a crushing embrace. 6 months later. The gallery in Wicker Park was warm, smelling of cheap wine and expensive perfume. The chatter of the crowd was a dull roar, punctuated by the clinking of glasses. Harrison stood near the back wall, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. It wasn't a bespoke Italian suit anymore. It was off the rack from Macy's. He didn't care. He felt more comfortable in his own skin than he ever had in the silk prisons of his past. He watched Kaelin across the room. She was glowing. Her exhibition, titled Rebirth, was a critical success. The paintings were visceral, dark storms breaking into blinding light, a visual diary of their last 3 years. She was laughing with a potential buyer, her hand resting lightly on Harrison's arm as she pulled him into the conversation. "And this," Kaelin said, her eyes shining. is my muse, and my partner in everything." Harrison smiled, shaking the buyer's hand. He excused himself to check on the VIP section. In a corner of the gallery, blocked off by velvet ropes, Leo and Mia were sitting on a pile of bean bags, watching cartoons on a tablet with headphones on. Leo was wearing a superhero cape over his dress shirt. Mia was asleep, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Harrison watched them for a long moment, the tightness in his chest loosening. They were safe. They were happy. They didn't know they were the heirs to a shattered dynasty, and Harrison intended to keep it that way. "Penny for your thoughts?" It was Arthur Penhaligon. The dishevelled lawyer looked slightly more presentable than usual, though his tie was still crooked. He held a manila envelope in his hand. "Just thinking about how fast they grow," Harrison said quietly. Arthur nodded, leaning against the wall. "I have the final probate documents, from Boston." Harrison stiffened. The air in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. "Is it done?" "It's done," Arthur said. "She passed away on Tuesday. The prison hospital said it was peaceful, mostly due to the morphine." Harrison looked down at his shoes. He waited for the grief to hit him, but it didn't come. Just a hollow, quiet acceptance. "And the will?" "That's the interesting part," Arthur said, a dry smile touching his lips. "She tried to change it, Harrison. 2 days before she died, she called in a notary. She tried to liquidate the entire estate and donate it to a political super PAC. She wanted to burn the money rather than let you have it." Harrison let out a short, bitter laugh. "Sounds like her." "But," Arthur continued, tapping the envelope against his palm, "we successfully argued that she was not of sound mind due to the advanced stage of her illness and the medication. The judge threw out the new will. The original testament stands." Arthur extended the envelope. "Everything reverts to the next of kin. You, Harrison. It's all yours. The houses, the accounts, the portfolio, all 1.2 billion of it." Harrison stared at the envelope. It looked like a bomb. For years, that money had been the leash around his neck. It was blood money, earned through ruthlessness and maintained through cruelty. He could feel Kaylin watching him from across the room. She knew what was in the envelope. She stopped talking to the buyer, her face unreadable, waiting to see what he would do. Harrison took the envelope. It felt heavy. "I don't want it," Harrison said. "You can't just throw it away, son," Arthur said gently. "That kind of power, it's a weapon. If you leave it, someone else will pick it up. The board of directors, the sharks. They'll consume it and keep doing what Genevieve did." Harrison looked at Leo and Mia. He thought about the daycare. He thought about the fear in his mother's eyes. "You're right," Harrison said. "It is a weapon. So let's aim it at something else." He turned to Arthur. "Liquidate the assets. Sell the Beacon Hill estate. Sell the summer home in the Hamptons. Sell the shares in the oil firms." "And do what with it?" Arthur asked, raising an eyebrow. "Start a foundation," Harrison said, his voice gaining strength. "A real one. I want to fund legal defense for single mothers fighting custody battles against wealthy partners. I want to fund medical research for blood disorders, research that doesn't rely on coercion. I want to build community centers in neighborhoods Genevieve wouldn't even drive through." Arthur smiled, a genuine wide grin that showed his yellowed teeth. "The Rossi Sterling Foundation?" "Just the Rossi Foundation," Harrison corrected him, looking at Kaylin. "The Sterling name has done enough damage. It's time for a new name to mean something." Kaylin walked over, sliding her hand into his. She squeezed tight. She had heard. "You sure?" she whispered. "We could keep a little. Buy a bigger house." "We have a house," Harrison said, kissing her forehead. "It has leaky faucets and a drafty window. But it has us. I don't need anything else." He looked back at the painting on the wall, the storm breaking, the sun coming through. Genevieve had tried to crush them. She had tried to bury them, but she forgot that they were seeds. And out of the ashes of her empire, something beautiful was finally beginning to grow. Harrison Sterling took the envelope, handed it back to Arthur, and turned to his wife. "Come on," he said, picking up a sleeping Mia. "Let's go home. I have to work in the morning." And so, the wedding of the decade didn't end with a kiss at the altar, but with a father finding his fight on a playground. Genevieve Sterling died as she lived, grasping for control in a world that had moved on without her. She thought legacy was about blood and bank accounts, but Harrison proved that real legacy is about who you're willing to bleed for, not who you take from. What do you think? Did Harrison make the right choice, rejecting his mother at the end? Or does family duty come first, no matter how toxic? And be honest, would you have invited your ex to your wedding just to be petty? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma, heartbreak, and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next scandal. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.